So the name of the panel is an homage to an old Broadway show. Anybody want to try to sing it?
Let's don't go there.
All right. Anyway, nice to see you all. We're going to be talking about the FAA registry and certain issues associated with it. All right. The first, there's three issues, actually. We're going to give you a bonus issue. The first one is the N-Reg losing its attraction. The second is balancing privacy and practicality. And the bonus topic is the CARES Act. Next slide. There we go. Is the N-Reg losing its mojo? And so you can see what our general comment is. Of course not. USA, USA, USA. Brucey, start off the conversation about whether you think it's losing its mojo.
First, tell us who you are, Bruce. Most of them know.
Yeah. But everybody knows you three, right?
Well, no.
All right, go ahead.
I hope so. Bruce Marshall, I'm General Counsel at AIC Title up in Oklahoma City. We're a title service company, and we do the same thing that my colleagues here on the panel. They're some of my most esteemed colleagues. We work together in our industry, trying to do the things that are right for our industry, representing interests of our industry in discussions with the FAA, and so that's what we do.
Thank you. Well, yeah, I guess you don't have to introduce yourself now, Scott, right?
Oh,
Yeah, go ahead.
very nice. Scott McCreary, law firm, partner at the law firm McAfee and Taft in Oklahoma City.
Jack Gilchrist, Gilchrist Aviation Law in Oklahoma City. We practice aviation law, in case you couldn't tell from the name. We don't know how to do anything else. Bruce.
Generally, if you've ever dealt with the folks in Oklahoma City, they're the kindest, nicest, most relaxed people in all of aviation, right? So there you go. All right, Brucey, now you can start.
Well, I guess the first question is the FAA registry losing some of its impetus and importance in the role of aviation? And while there have been some recent events from an operational standpoint that the FAA has had, I don't think this is really the situation involving the registry. It's not losing any traction. It's still one of the gold standards, adds value to the ownership of aircraft because of a lot of the systems that are in place. The certainty that you have in your ownership of an aircraft with the registry has enabled it to be at one of the most important registries in the world, which again accommodates most of the business aircraft, particularly in our field in the world, are registered on the U.S. registry. In terms of numbers, if we look to 2010, when they started aircraft re-registration, when it was rolling on a 3-year cycle, a lot of aircraft were eliminated from the registry at that time. It was recognized that a number of these aircraft had been scrapped, they'd been parted out, and their skins relegated to their next reincarnation as beer cans, their aluminum skins. So we lost 50 or 60,000 aircraft on the registry at that time over the next few 3-year cycles. But after that, the registry has continued to grow back. The last time I looked at the numbers, which would have been for a panel, I was working with these gentlemen at NAFA in 2022, and at that time the registry had about 298,000 aircraft on the registry. Today, as of the end of October, there were something like 307,530 aircraft still registered on the U.S. aircraft registry. Now that's made up of all the commercial aircraft, the business aircraft, general aviation, helicopters, and you can throw in some experimental aircraft and a handful of hot air balloons. So the registry is something that has continued to grow over the years, and it's moving in that direction.
Yeah, and I think, I was just going to add, I think the reason for the growth, primarily the FAA, the aircraft registry is one of the systems, maybe one of the only systems in the world where you can retrieve full document records from birth to present. That is, the way they maintain the records, which we'll talk a lot about that actually here today. The value of that in the history of an aircraft, particularly ownership, liens, any sort of security interest, leases, and so on, And then that creates a sort of a foundation for an aircraft record that's much more fungible. It becomes a more valuable asset in the process. So lending is safer. Lending is probably, it's fair to say, safest in the United States on aircraft asset-backed lending and that sort of thing too. So I think that's an important aspect of that.
Scott mentioned that about it being a title registry also, and how unique that is.
Yeah, and I backing up for a second too, I think the whole idea that the FAA is losing its mojo is kind of fake news, to be honest, because there are more business jets all over the world.
Al started it, I think.
Exactly.
Is where that came from.
But there have always been reasons to register aircraft in other jurisdictions on other registries, and there are more aircraft out there to register. So yeah, there's an uptick on these other registries. But more often than not, if you look at all the factors for comparing registries and if it's the right, it depends on where the client's operating and what they're really thinking about. But people end up where the FAA registry sifts up to the top if they look at all the factors. And so, I think that, there are reasons to put aircraft on other registries, but there are a lot of really good reasons to put aircraft on the U.S. registry. And as you said, Bruce, it's actually, there's an uptick in U.S. aircraft registrations. And it's not just aircraft being registered at the FAA, it's, ownership. So you have all the actual aircraft that are being registered, but you also have fractional programs where an owner is getting into the system, getting into aviation and choosing to, own an aircraft that is of record with the FAA. So, yeah, I don't think it's losing its mojo. I think it's probably increasing, if anything.
So would it have more mojo if they moved it away from Oklahoma City to, let's say, some more exotic city like Baltimore?
No, I mean...
All right, never mind. That wasn't really a question.
If you haven't been there, Oklahoma City is like the cultural center of the universe.
Absolutely,
I mean,
right. It's the middle of everything.
Place,
Please come and see us.
It wouldn't be good.
Please come see us.
Okay, next slide. Wise guys. Any other thoughts about the mojo issue?
Well,
relative to these points?
marketability is a factor because of the fact that you talk about maintenance and airworthiness standards in the United States. So you can have a registry and register aircraft, but if you don't enforce that it adds a pain to it too when you talk about airworthiness and airworthiness standards and so on. But those standards are what everybody's been talking about this morning: safety and the safety of the system and the U.S. system and so on, which adds to marketability of aircraft. It's at the very foundation. I think it's a safety issue too. So the FAA
Right.
continues
And
to
going
add that.
back to marketability, I think a key thing that Jack mentioned is that this is an owner registry, not an operator registry. And as an owner registry, it has maintained the records of ownership of an aircraft from its inception through all the reiterations and all the changes in hands. You can track that ownership, which adds to the value, knowing that when you are acquiring that asset, you actually either own that asset, or if you're trying to acquire an interest in that asset, a lien, if you're a finance company, you're going to be in a good position because of that complete record of ownership in the registry.
Excellent. Yeah, I was going to actually have you do the next slide.
Okay.
Okay. Scott, what do you think about privacy and practicality? How
Yeah,
would balance?
so privacy's, there's been a huge increase in focus on privacy in the business jet world. And a lot of that's driven by, very high profile people that have been tracked that didn't like it. And there was a, recent incident of that just recently that Eddie pointed out.
Well, the poll question you'll see is practicality versus privacy, right? And so privacy, ask Kash Patel. Scott, I think that's what you were alluding to?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Everybody know what we were referring to when we were referencing the director of the FBI? Want to elaborate, anyone? All right, never mind. All right, yeah, is that too political? But there you go. Yeah. In any event, then the other aspect of it is practicality. So, right, the practicality associated with knowing who owns the aircraft, if you're buying a used aircraft, and financing aircraft, and knowing whether there's a lien on the airframe or the engines, et cetera. But that's the balancing we're talking about.
Yeah, so are we doing the polling question, or?
Yeah, the polling question there and
Okay.
practicality is winning.
But the issue with the privacy is there's really been this, hyper focus on the information that's of record with the FAA, and like this almost incorrect thought that is the genesis of how people are tracking every aircraft and the main culprit. But there is information of record with the FAA about an aircraft and its ownership. We're an owner registry, and you do have to submit, ownership documents of record with the FAA. But there are also ways to, enter into privacy structures that greatly reduce or even eliminate the amount of personal information that's in the FAA record, which we'll talk about later. But there's, just people aren't just tracking aircraft based off of figuring out, who's the owner of record with the FAA. They're tracking the aircraft from, somebody flies from point A to point B and posts a selfie, with their aircraft. There are aircraft that have company logos on them. They can do whatever they want to prevent the information in the FAA record, but if they roll up and they've got a company logo on the aircraft, someone's probably going to figure it out. There are, vanity N numbers on the aircraft. We've had deals where we help clients with, pretty much eliminating all of the privacy information about the owner from the FAA record, and then, a month or two later checked and they had their radio station license all issued in the name of the end operator of the aircraft. So there are a lot of ways that this information is publicly disseminated that has nothing to do with what's in the FAA aircraft registry.
Yeah, I want to echo that because that's a big, particularly with the Reauthorization Act and stuff that came out with that, and the whole personally identifying information, the privacy, they really sort of tried to kill a gnat with a hammer, and they didn't even kill the gnat basically. But the fact is that that the information that's in the FAA record. The objective is now that they have a right to keep their name private, their phone number private, any sort of identifying information. So it's way over the top. We'll talk a little bit about the act itself and about how there's a lot about it that's unclear. But I think that fact that what they're saying is if we just keep that out of the FAA record, then we can maintain privacy for these folks who want to maintain sort of travel privacy, people who want to do that. But again, they bring it on themselves. Like Scott mentioned, they take a photo, or people, anytime somebody takes a photo of them outside their airplane, then instantly the information is out there on social media, and that's the result of that. So you can't protect that at the end of the day. So it's I realize, and I think the NBAA has been big behind the concept of protecting personally identifying information from the records, but they didn't talk a lot with us in the process. But the fact is that it's the wrong approach to try to protect people's information. There's some things you can do, but yeah.
I would say, let's go on to the next slide, because I think you'll get more into it when you speak about the Reauthorization Act.
Yeah. So the idea, again, there are a few, with the Reauthorization Act and mandating enhanced privacy, the concept that the Act brought out there was that that personally identifying information, which they describe very broadly, would be kept off of widely published, widely published websites, off of the FAA websites, right? Which again, we don't rely on the website, by the way, for information that we find in Oklahoma City, but there's a possibility that the FAA takes that away ultimately, that we're all dealing with an electronic record, or the website record basically, which would be a train wreck, first of all, but But anyway, but that concept, particularly through the Reauthorization Act, the idea was to help or to enhance privacy, but the idea is not solved. The problem is not solved by simply keeping it off of the website.
Yeah, and the 2024 Reauthorization Act, that is one of the primary catalysts for, this change in regard to privacy, because there's an actual statute section generated, through that act that deals with privacy. But interestingly enough, the Reauthorization Act also mandated that the FAA implement the recommendations that the Government Accountability Office published whenever they audited the FAA back in 2020, and that report was published. And so, in a way, they produced a privacy statute section that's going to limit information that's publicly available. But if you look at the GAO report itself and the 15 recommendations, the FAA is now going to be requiring a lot more information than they ever did in connection with, every owner of an aircraft. So it's kind of an interesting.
It's a dichotomy, yeah.
It certainly is.
Yeah, it's a situation where the GAO mandated their concerns with the fact that people were being permitted to register and own aircraft in very opaque structures, that there really wasn't any transparency or visibility. And that was one of their mandates, is to fix that situation to the FAA. But by eliminating the names and addresses of the individuals, of the owners of those aircraft, they're really and truly suddenly taking individual aircraft and making that an opaque structure if we don't know who that person is in the registry that owns that aircraft. And their latest impetus, and one that we as an industry responded to, the FAA wanted to extend that limitation of personal identification information from individuals to companies and associations and entities, and basically for all aircraft registrations. Now, today, the folks in Oklahoma City, we're able to look behind the scenes. We can look behind the kimono or up the kilt and see what's really going on. If you look through their CARES initiative, you'll see a notification that the owners redacted that information. We can see the information still, but we get a warning that the owner has elected that privacy, and then disclosing it, as we've always done in our information, to our customers, the finance companies, the insurance companies, the buyers of aircraft. It's really unclear. Are we engaging in a privacy violation when we disclose that information? And I think a big focus, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in the direction of the CARES program, but if the FAA keeps this up and if they do what they're planning on doing, we may not have that visibility behind the scenes as to ownership, which can cause a lot of issues for all of us trying to accommodate our KYC as well as the practical aspects. And we can talk more about that, of just trying to buy an aircraft if we don't know who owns it.
To keep rolling, we're going to skip the next slide because I think we covered that. Let's go to transparency versus privacy. So that's a Scott question to start off with, right? You want to talk about registry, about the registry, how it's intended to ensure the transparency, yet how it does or doesn't work in that regard?
Yeah, sure. So I'm going to back up for 1 second. So we've talked about the GAO report, the recommendations that came out in 2020. We've talked about the 2024 Reauthorization Act, which is a catalyst. It's what produced the privacy statute that everyone's looking at now. But how the FAA is implementing a lot of these changes is through the CARES program. And the CARES program is actually something that was started even before 2020, where the FAA is modernizing all of its.
What does that acronym stand for?
Civil Aviation Registry Electronic System.
That's why we have Jack. He's good at
Yes,
acronyms.
I learned a new
Exactly.
acronym.
But
yeah,
so it's a technology upgrade, but they had to have that in order to implement a lot of these changes, because it would be impossible for them to really implement some of the additional requirements for information, but also some of the privacy issues without the CARES Act. And we'll talk about it a little bit more, but the way that the FAA is implementing the CARES Act is really kind of concerning for the industry. Going forward, though, but on balancing privacy and practicality, it's great, and everyone understands, and we need to have privacy when it deals with, business jet aircraft. But the FAA has another function. So the FAA serves as basically the central repository for documents that are filed in connection with buying, selling, leasing, financing, and registering, aircraft. And the system is the way the FAA system works, as Bruce mentioned earlier, you register the aircraft in the name of its owner. It's not an operator registry, so the registered owner may or may not be the operator. But you also file the actual documents with the FAA, like a real estate record. So bills of sale, leases, security agreements, releases, discharges, all that kind of stuff. They're all filed and of record with the FAA, along with the ancillary documents that you have to submit to the FAA based on FAA regulations in support of recording those documents. So there are trust agreements and powers of attorney and all these other documents that are in the record. And you're considered on notice from an FAA perspective of everything that's in that record. So it's not just what's recorded, you have to read it and analyze it and make sure the documentation was correct. And so, there's a big part of what the registry is for the industry and for, the world is this place where you can go and look and find out everything you need to know about the aircraft and its ownership and operation in a way, from that record. So it's very important that the industry still has access to all of that information.
Well, and there's also decades-old court decisions from the Supreme Court of the United States saying that is the function and purpose of that registry, is to serve as that depository. And as Scott mentioned, it puts us all on notice of potential interest in those aircraft. It's what they call actual notice. If there's enough information there for you to start asking questions, all the answers may not be there, but at least you have enough information to start asking those questions. And so not only has the FAA set up a system to allow that, it's been as a matter of court law that is the purpose of the U.S. registry.
I mean, there is a distinction between commercial law to determine who owns an aircraft or an engine or an aviation asset, and the function of the FAA registry and how the transportation code works regarding those issues. Commercial law dictates who owns a particular aircraft or an engine, but in order to operate an aircraft, the ownership needs to be registered with the FAA, and there are other related issues, but. Our friend Oscar is scrolling through the slides. I think that's his hint to tell us to get on to the CARES Act.
Good point, yeah.
I want to throw one other thing out. So it's not just finding out who owns an aircraft, for your transaction, so buy, sell, lease, finance. The industry relies on a lot of this information for industry trends, for determining, where the market's going, for identifying who's buying an aircraft, just from a broad perspective. And so limiting access to this information could have lots of other effects, not just on one specific deal, but on how brokers figure out what aircraft that, they're selling and where and what models and that sort of thing. They need more access to that information. The lenders need access to that information, and the companies that summarize and provide that information to the industry need to have access to that, and they need to be able to disclose it and not be prohibited from disclosing that information to the industry.
Let me jump in on this slide if I can, as we talk about the CARES initiative. So the system itself it's actually up and running, the Civil Aviation Registry electronic system, so you can access the system. Technically, it's not, as far as what we've seen to date, it's not near what it has to be ultimately in order for them to present to the public a fully electronic system, because there's a lot that it does not do right now. But the real challenge for us, I would say, and as a result, it's a challenge for you in the CARES initiative, is we've had very little dialogue with the FAA. I think that's an overstatement. That is, maybe it's an understatement. We've had very little interaction with the FAA in connection with what's required in this system to make it functional for the public as a whole. You can access the system itself. Part of that is part of the GAO recommendations. That is an electronic system that's easily accessible for people to get into. Well, now they're balancing that, as we said previously, we're balancing that with the issue of privacy concerns, right? And the NBAA's initiative on let's keep information private, but the GAO has said we want it accessible to people. So there's this dichotomy, there's this tension between the two. The regulations, as we stated earlier, the FAA regulations, U.S. Transportation Code, actually require that it be available to the public to view, to reach conclusions as a result of that too. So they're going to have to take some action in connection with that if they don't make it available.
I think part of it was the sequencing of events.
Yeah.
Right? So, the government audits its various, agencies and operations to see what they can do better. And so these general accounting office reports noted that the FAA registry was just a bunch of piles of paper everywhere, right? And it was outdated, and the whole functionality was outdated. And then at the same time, there was this concern about money laundering and terrorism and the like. So the thought was, we'll create this digital system that'll be modern, right? We'll get rid of the paper. And also, it's our chance to gather data that will be useful for transparency purposes, but more so, not for the public so much, but for the other agencies, right? So the FBI, right? The TSA, the CIA, et cetera. And so, all of a sudden, right, gathering digital information more easily accessed, et cetera. And then somebody complained to their congressperson about PII, right? So it's the information that people who wanted to have an interest in an aircraft didn't want to disclose, right? They for the reasons that you all know. And so then there was this second direction, right, to not only do what we already told you to do regarding the registry and collecting information, but by the way, but don't give away any private information. And so that's why there's this tension. They didn't think about it at the same time.
Well,
it was
again,
one over the other.
It's a conflict, Eddie, between these initiatives, these privacy initiatives, which are focused, and their intent really is to focus on privacy and aircraft operations, yet they've commingled and mixed the issue with privacy of aircraft ownership information. And the two are really separate issues, and trying to solve the one issue through limiting access to who actually owns an aircraft isn't solving. Again, one, it doesn't solve the issue of privacy of operations, but yet it also has a lot of unintended consequences to the people on our end of the industry and our customer base that relies on us to be able to gather information about who owns an aircraft, what interests are in that aircraft, what is the current status of that to be able to transact.
Oscar, I'm sorry, keep going.
Well, I was just going to say,
skip to this next slide.
The impact that I don't think people really understand are the consequences of restricting this information from us. It basically will turn, if you have an undisclosed owner of an aircraft, it basically turns a buyer's acquisition of that aircraft into a let's make a deal game. Behind door number one, you have the undisclosed seller who happens to be a cyber terrorist. Behind door number two, you have the undisclosed seller who's a money launderer and human trafficker. And behind door number three, possibly, you have the actual owner of that aircraft. But we can't, if the FAA continues down the path that they're going with CARES and these privacy concerns, we won't be able to determine that we really should be working with the person behind door number three. And in this case, the person acquiring the aircraft isn't playing with their winnings from the game. They're actually using their own funds and risking those, Or if they have a lender involved, it's the lender's funds. And you hope they get lucky and pick the right person, because if they don't end up with title to an aircraft, as well as they may have other enforcement agencies, OFAC and other government enforcement agencies knocking on their door to say, hey, you just sent a bunch of money to the wrong people you shouldn't have been working with and dealing with, which again emphasizes the importance for all of us to know who owns an aircraft, or at least the people in the industry that need to know to be able to transact. I'm not saying absolute public knowledge to everybody, but at least we need in our end of the industry in Oklahoma to be able to still gather that information and share it with our customer base.
Yeah, I think, and let me say here real quick too, that I think you're hearing, unfortunately, you're on the receiving end of a lot of ventilation up here, which we apologize for. In some ways, I mean, and we're simply stating a lot of problems with the way they've approached it. The problem that we have right now is it's the FAA who in DC, even in Oklahoma City, is not listening, and so that's the challenge that we have. That is, there is nobody that's asking us in Oklahoma City, the people that have worked with the system for now 30, in my case, 36 years, 37 years. We've worked with it for so long, we understand what it takes, but the FAA is not asking for our input in connection with what do we have to do to balance both of these issues.
But mention how big a change that is, right? That wasn't what the tradition was, right? And the CARES Act is a bunch of tech folks who put together a system without really understanding what they were doing. It couldn't work.
Yeah, we've experienced that. We've all experienced that at some level, that your tech guys deliver that new system for you, or they install that new software or whatever it is, and they say you should be good now, and they walk away, and you're going, I don't even know how to get into the thing or whatever, or no, where's my stuff? I don't know where my stuff is, that kind of thing. And I think that's the case, and we have to have dialogue on the issue, and we're pursuing that. In all honesty, we've written letters actually. In response, the industry, Oklahoma City industry, has written letters in response pushing the FAA to say, we have to have dialogue on this, because you guys, this is going to be a train wreck at the end of the day.
Well, and we've also tried to engage through NAFA and GAMA to try to open the doors and develop a dialogue, but so far it's fallen on deaf ears. They haven't opened up that opportunity for us to interact with them and perhaps avoid what Jack's referring to as a train wreck, but I would say it's a plane wreck. In this case, Casey's stolen the throttle and the plane just won't slow down.
Yeah, back in the day, we could solve all these problems with a couple of beers with Joe Standell at a conference like this, and we just don't have that connection with the FAA anymore.
That's part of what the FAA has taken that approach, and I would say over the last 8 years, maybe more, the FAA has taken a sort of a stiff arm approach, keeping us at arm's length much more. They like to try to, it's become less sort of user friendly, less customer focused, and much more. We know our business, we'll do our business, and we'll let you know when we've done our business, basically, too.
Can you mention how when we refer to FAA, there's really different parts of the FAA, and how that can matter in terms of what happens with the registry in particular and why it's changed?
Yeah, so I think when we're talking about the FAA, we're primarily talking about the registry, right? So that's what we're really referring to. We're not referring broadly to the FAA in general, but a lot of the oversight for the registry in the decision-making is really it seems like it's being conducted more in DC now than locally.
Yeah, in the past, some of the representatives and the managers were all located in Oklahoma City. We knew those people for years. We had interactions with them. But we've seen a movement of their privacy office is all coming out of DC, as well as some of the management of the registry itself are people that have offices in DC and occasionally show up in Oklahoma City, but we don't have this constant interaction that we used to have in the past. And I think that's changed things.
Well, it was the enforcement arm, right, that was pushing, the collection of information, right? The point is that there's the registry, there's the enforcement arm, right? And so, they all have their own agendas. They don't necessarily, sort of jive so as to work together for our purposes, at least. But, okay, why don't we just do some questions? Are there any questions? Not seeing any, which is fine, Anybody raising a hand, or no? We're good? We're good. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Ed, can I?
Wait, Bruce has got something.
Oh, I just wanted to mention one last thing. If you have the time, spend some time and look at the or the submission that the folks in Oklahoma City put together. It's listed in our materials that we responded to the FAA issues. I think it helps people really get a better in-depth understanding. We did one as an industry, and our entire group in Oklahoma City. Our company supplied one as well. And I think if you spend some time and read through those, you'll become better educated on what's transpiring and what's happening today. And I think it's important for everybody to know, because we're moving in a direction, I believe, is something that we need to find a solution to before it shuts down our business.
So there you go. Look at the first question. What is the solution? Do we have one? We've complained. You know, usually when you complain about something, you have to suggest a solution.
I think we've offered up as an industry the solution that we still have the ability and the access behind the scenes, the people that really need to know, to be able to see the information.
But who's the we? Is that the general public?
It's the people at the FAA Public Documents Room.
Well,
The
yeah.
permittees at the Public Documents Room need to have unfettered access like we have now.
I'm telling you, you don't solve the privacy issue with air traffic, okay? You don't solve it in Oklahoma City. It's not solvable there. You cannot do it. It's some other method, but it's not what information is in the FAA record. It has nothing to do
Well,
with
and
that.
ADSB has only been around for about 5 years now. It's really a short life, yet this is operational information that's now been commingled in the registry side, which I think is causing a lot of the problems. The FAA has contributed to that information and data should be kept separate from the ownership information. I think that's a solution to it, to keep that separated and then set up the guidelines. Who needs access to that type of information and the rules and requirements for that, and take it away from what we need to do to be able to transact, buy, and sell aircraft.
Take a look at the anonymous question, right? So I guess the implication there is that there's a concern about their privacy still?
That's the reason they asked it anonymously. But
Right.
But I think
That was very clever for a guy from Oklahoma City.
I try.
All right, sorry.
I sometimes I fall into it. I think if people that are going to be affected, I think it's dialogue with the FAA. I think certainly it's being vocal with insofar as you have that opportunity. I think it's pressing representatives in DC and so on. I think you have to take that approach to say we have to have a system that is accessible, it can be accessible on a limited basis to qualified people, and I'm not suggesting it's just the three of us. There's lots of it. I see Joan out there. There's lots of qualified people to access this information, and that part of it is not the problem with privacy. That's not the reason that the Elon Musk of this world, people know where they're flying. That's not the issue.
Anything else? We're done. Thank you very much.